Hello and welcome back, sculpture class. This week we are going to work on representational relief sculptures, and this is your fourth project for the class. And for this project, we're looking at an image of a traditional relief sculpture, and that is something that is either reductive, carved out of normally a stone, in this case marble, or additive. So if you think of like putting a clay slab down and then adding bits of clay on top of it. But a relief sculpture generally has a flat surface. So it is three-dimensional, but there is a flat backing so that you can hang it on the wall. And then the sculptural part is attached or fused on the front of it. So this is a traditional one that we're looking at. This is the interior of Santa Giovanni Paolo in Venice, and it is a good example of what we are most often used to seeing in relief sculpture. But we are going to work in a more contemporary way. It's also, you're going to be creating something representational. And so by representational, what I mean is something that you can recognize. So what you're looking at now is a relief sculpture of three people. And it could be, you can make representational art of all kinds of things, plant, of a flower, of really anything. If you can tell that it's a landscape, then it's representational, and it's in opposite of abstract, where you've taken what you're looking at and you change it or make it sort of an impression of it that is not directly what you're seeing, and you're not recording in some way what you're seeing. So we're making something representational. It's not realism, but it will the goal of this project is going to be to make something that looks like something else. So first, I'm going to actually show you an artist that today's presentation is all based on one artist. And that's because this artist had a lot of examples. And I thought that it would be really excellent to kind of look through his whole catalog of work, because there's so many different ways that he has worked, and he always uses materials, though, that are recognizable, that are things that are around. And so this is Noah Scallon, and he likes to make sculptures with things around him. And his sort of concept is rooted in the medieval concept of memento mori. So a reflection a reflection on mortality meant to spur a greater reverence for life and a reevaluation of priorities. So he wants us to take notice of everyday moments. And so he uses everyday objects to do that. By using everyday items, including mass-produced consumer goods, in his photographs, installations, and sculptures, Scallon asks the viewer to recontextualize the things in their life that are normally taken for granted, overlooked, or discarded. So he did this project called Skull a Day in 2007 to 2008, and he just kind of announced that every day for a year he was going to start making a skull, or make it one skull per every day of the year. And so for 365 days, he figured out a new way to make an image of a skull every day and posted it online. He actually won a Webby Award for this project. And in this, what you're looking at right now is a skull he made out of cereal and a skull he made out of coffee beans. Here is like a hotel room and a sheet that he's used to create, just kind of twisted it in a skull form. And just common silverware. And toys. So he's really just taking a flat surface and then putting these things on the flat surface and either moving them or reforming them. But these are sculptural. They're just, what you're seeing is the artifact from that sculpture, because they are temporary sculptures. So then he moved into a project called Dead Media, and he felt that in this modern era of digital communication and cloud storage, the physical forms for storing data are rapidly becoming extinct. And so he wants to know, he's questioning what happens to the massive amount of stuff we've created once they have no functional purpose. So what you're seeing are VHS tapes. This is what in the 80s and 90s was how you watched movies at home. So you would go to a store like a Blockbuster, you would rent these VHS tapes, and then also you could have a camcorder to record your home movies on these VHS tapes, but they are no longer a primary means for capturing digital imagery. So this was the sort of the first big thing after film, was to have this VHS tape that would record imagery. So here we have records, and he's placed it in a stairwell. And one of the things that he does is he creates site-specific installations. So that means he is finding a place and he's making an installation. And site-specific installations are a part of sculpture. It's considered an extension of the sculpture world. And site-specific installations basically are you're finding a place and you are making an artwork in that place, and more often than not, they're temporary. So they only last a certain amount of time, and then after that time, they only live on in photographs. Here we have CDs or DVDs. Then he moved on to something called the Manhattan Project, and it was a portrait series that featured scientists who were fundamental in the creation of the world's first nuclear weapon. And he meticulously created each portrait of each scientist with 1,000 matches. And then when he was done, he set the matches on fire, and that fire burned the paper that was beneath them to create an after image. The series dealt with dissonance between the good intentions of scientists who believed they were preventing Hitler from winning the World War, and with the devastating long-term reality of their work. And so he's sort of making a piece that sort of harkens to the before and after effect. These are very powerful and evocative images, but they are also not an invitation for you to make a piece with matches in which you set it on fire. So please remember that safety always comes first. If we were in our classroom, we would be practicing safety through glasses and tying our hair back, things of that nature. Since you are working from home, I'm showing you this work because I think it's evocative and a good example of making imagery with objects and making relief sculpture, but it's not an invitation to be unsafe. He then moved into making a piece, continuing with scientists, but the Natural Selection Portrait series was exploring the life of scientists who made impacts on the world, so a more general look at science and scientists and their impacts. And he in this particular piece, he has Einstein, and then he has dice. With Marie Curie, he is, with these pieces, you'll notice that there is a skull that he also makes. So he actually, each diptych is made up of a portrait of a deceased scientist, but then he represents their skull, by taking apart the initial image with those and using those objects once again to create the skull. And he is using that in the spirit of the traditional samandalas of Tibetan Buddhists. And so this is part of his beliefs and his spiritual practice. And so he is incorporating that into this work and recontextualizing it to work with the concept of sort of temporality and how things change, and also how things become and transform over time. Here we have Darwin, and Darwin created the theory of evolution, and so he spent a lot of time on the Galapagos Islands with birds, and so Scanlon's used bird feathers. and Tesla. So Tesla worked with different kinds of, exploring power and the Tesla coil. And so these are motors that are, I believe they're motors used to make up his face. And then Turing, who worked in sort of the origins of computation. And so you have computer keys making up his face. So then he started working in projects that were celebrations of people. His view, more contemporarily, is now a little bit less on the critical side. And he is doing public installations that celebrate people and their gifts to society. So this is Frances Lewis, and he works, he tries to celebrate people that are relative to the spaces he's in. So he was an artist in residence at Virginia Commonwealth University, and Lewis was a long-time supporter of the arts and philanthropy in Richmond, and because of her philanthropy and the way that she supported community, he made a piece where people brought in food and non-perishable items and toiletries, and he made this image of her, and then at the end those pieces were given to people in need. And if you notice right now, we're viewing this from a perspective of someone just walking in the room and looking straight across. So we're looking actually in perspective or in the different distance. And so the way he actually built these was so that it would work with our sense of perspective. So he's elongated them so that when we stand in front of the table, the perspective, which tends to shorten as we look at it, or condense, it's not warped. And so it actually, he's aiding our vision by making these elongated images. Here we have Maggie Walker, and we will be seeing a video actually of how he created this, and he talks about her work and her contribution to society as an African American female entrepreneur and the first female banker.
It was a trial and error for me. I sort of figured it out in the process of doing it. I like to tell people it's like doing a magic trick for the first time publicly. So it's it's a bit terrifying, but it's fun, and it's great to discover that it works. Mostly people are just like, what's going on here? And I love saying, come look in the camera. And they do, and literally you'll have one person after the next going, wow.
It's completely different. Even when you see it.
Oh, you gotta see this. The next one's like, oh my goodness, what am I seeing? And it's over and over, and it's just, I love that aspect. So the Portraits of Innovation series started really out of opportunity. People offered me spaces to make art, and I was like, this is great, but what am I gonna do? The first time I used clothes was actually at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and I ended up loving it as a material because there's lots of colors, it's extremely flexible, different shapes and sizes to work with, and I'm really interested in working with everyday materials. And in this case, what was great is that here's this opportunity to then get the students and faculty involved by collecting the clothing, and then we can donate them. And the things that really interest me are actually innovators, people who've been really wonderfully creative, done unique things. So Maggie Walker is from Richmond, lived in the neighborhood that abuts this school. But she's not the first African American woman to charter a bank. She's the first woman to charter a bank in America. That's a huge deal. How better to represent, the wonderful people here who are striving to do something really wonderful with their own lives. So it's sort of using a very old-fashioned traditional technique, which is literally a piece of glass or plastic in my case, where I've outlined the image and I'm holding it up in space and I'm looking at, okay, well, where does that top dot end up? Okay, that's on the floor way back there. So we stand there, put a piece of tape there. And then we shift from that after I'm sort of laying in the rough colors, rough shapes, getting it kind of where it needs to be, to the computer, using the camera as my eye. So the camera, I take a photo, I put it on the computer, I compare it to the image, and I overlay it and say, okay, now that I've seen this, this needs to move to the left, this to the right. I can be literally just making, moving the bend of a piece of fabric, a fold, and it's creating a shadow that's making a dramatic change in the image. So I'm using the technology as an interface because I can't trust my own eyes on this. Our brains want to understand the world as, well, things far away are the same size as things close up, so it's adjusting it. And so we're not getting an accurate representation of the world through our own eyes.
You just need one Pixar sock to fix it.
Change of perspective is really important. And so it's great when you can do a piece like this where people are literally changing their perspective. They're walking and saying, I don't know what this is. It's a pile of clothing. Oh, it's kind of cool. It's colorful. What is it? A fish? Is it a boat? Just think how that would change, right? How you would then see opportunities around you all the time, right? What are you missing in your life when you're walking out to the world going, gee, is there something hidden here that I'm not seeing? And certainly in the workplace, that's really necessary.
In life, everything's all about looking at things from different perspectives, and it just goes back to thinking creatively. I think it's awesome for business students to have a more creative outlet.
It's such a gratifying thing as an artist because you want to change people's perspectives, but, and in this case very literally, but to have people, one by one come up and go, wow, oh, I didn't know that was there. Oh my goodness, I had no idea. You know that, right, that little light bulb's gone off in their head and they're now looking at their world differently.
So this one is actually an outdoor piece. It's made of gravel, mulch, and broken pottery. And the botanical garden there in Richmond was bequeathed to the city by Grace Arntz. And so she had inherited a bunch of money, and she used it to do philanthropic things throughout Richmond, Virginia, including opening the first public baths, creating the first free library and first playground. And she was also the first, she funded the first low-income housing in that area. This is a portrait of Helen Keller made from clothing. And this was a piece he did in New York as part of an art event. And while most people are familiar with Helen Keller's story of childhood triumph, she was also an activist and very outspoken for disabled rights. She was an anti-war activist, a socialist, and one of the founders of the ACLU, which, because she was very political, she turned from, the media kind of turned on her from being sort of poster child of overcoming adversity to kind of faulting her and claiming that she was impaired in her mental facilities because of her disabilities. So she's a very famous woman who overcame disabilities, but then continued to be a activist later in life. So for this project, the Representational Relief Project, you're going to create a portrait of someone you admire using multiples of an object readily available to you around the house. So that can be things like clothing, like things we've seen, clothing, silverware, toothpicks, gears, dice, toys. You're going to arrange them in some way on a flat surface, and you're going to build them up and continue to manipulate them until you have somewhat of a representational portrait of someone you admire. Make sure that you find a secure flat surface on which to work. So nothing that's kind of wobbly, things will move around in ways you don't want. And something that you can kind of come back to if you find that you can't just, do this in one sitting. So places like a floor, a backyard, a table, or a desk are great. as long as you can find an area in which you can work and keep that from being cleared off or shaken or disrupted. Photograph your portrait from a few angles to see which one makes the best image, and then upload that picture to the website. I am not expecting you to elongate the perspective so that it's viewed perfectly. I recommend that whatever you do, you try to get an aerial photograph so you stand above it and photograph straight down. That'll be your best shot. But do what you can do. This is not going to be an easy project if you approach it with full intent. So do your best. Hopefully it's a good challenge. So thinking about that person you admire and then how you represent them, how you make their image, their portrait, and some sort of massive objects you have around the house. Remember that you can work large or you can work small. So work in the way that is going to be most comfortable to you. If you feel like it's going to take you a while, then you might want to work small so that you can put it aside every now and then get back to it. If you're really ambitious and you want to work big, great. If it doesn't work out, still take the photograph and send us whatever your best attempt is. It's okay to not have 100% success. The bottom line is just to try and experiment and see how you can interact with objects in your daily life and then use them to create an image. And always, always, always remember to put your safety first. And then the safety of everyone around you. So work in ways that are safe, use materials that are safe, and be in places that are safe. The due dates are next Monday and Tuesday. We will not be having class meetings. We will not have a Zoom early in the week. Instead, I'm going to be doing individual meetings. So later this week, I'm going to check in with you and see how your project's going and talk to you about your last projects briefly and just kind of have a check-in. So next week, by your class time, you need to have a photo of this piece uploaded. Feel free to send me emails with questions. I'm happy to clarify things and have fun. All right, thank you.